Hi, I'm Russ Camarda, an independent filmmaker and actor in New York, and in between the chances I get to do my creative projects, I love to sit down and talk with other artists to see how it is they do what they do, how they take art and use their craft to reveal truth to an audience. So in this series of conversations, you'll meet some people you may recognize, some people you won't recognize, but they're all independent artists, and we'll get in depth in a long-form conversation to see how it is they do what they do. Welcome to Art, Craft, Truth. This time on the Art, Craft, Truth podcast, screenwriter, comedian Devanshi Patel, from her days as a young stand-up comic among some of the great names of comedy in New York City, to moving to Hollywood to become a screenwriter for television shows like Blackish and God Friended Me, she pulls back the curtain in this no-holds-barred conversation on what it's like to be a working writer in Hollywood. Devanshi Patel. Okay, here she comes. Hi.
Hi.
How you doing?
Good. How are you?
Good. Nice to meet you. So you can hear me okay? Everything's good?
Yeah.
All right. Well, you sound fantastic as well. I think we're good there. Hi.
Thank you.
How do I pronounce your name so I don't screw it up and butcher everything right off the bat?
Devanshi.
Devanshi. Like Vanshi.
Devanshi.
Okay.
Yes.
All right. Well, I'm Russ. How you doing?
Yeah.
And you come from Kate Van Devender, which is awesome. How's your let's see. I'm just going to take a look at something real quick. Yours is your video is stuttering a little bit, so
Okay, I'll be back in like a minute. Is that okay?
yeah, absolutely.
Okay, this should be better. There's a lot of stuff on Wi-Fi in this house, so
Okay, well, it sounds okay, and I think we should be all right.
let's do it.
Cool. You're primarily a writer. You're also an actor. I saw that, but you're a writer. Right.
I'm primarily a writer. Yeah, I started out doing stand-up comedy in New York, and I wasn't actually doing. I was in New York doing finance as well because I went to college in New York, and I wanted to go to Tisch, and my dad said no. And as the story goes, with Indian families, the parents always went out, always went out.
That's right.
So I did finance during the day after I graduated. I worked in finance and, hated it. And then I did stand up at night. And I was doing like 20 to 25 shows a week at one point. And it was a lot. And I didn't really realize it until much later. And I was like, oh, my immune system is shot. I see how this works. I got like no sleep.
Right.
'Cause I was just shuttling back and forth between like my finance job and doing stand up. But I was super lucky because I was in New York doing stand up at the time when Chappelle Show was on, and Patrice O'Neill was there, and Bill Burr was there, and Jim Norton. Like they were all, I was at the Boston Comedy Club, and the Comedy Cellar was right around the corner. So like as I was coming up, these guys would come and just like pop in and do like a quick 10,
Sure.
and it would be incredible. And so I was often the only or one of the only females on that was going to perform at any given time at night. So it was like you had to be this funny to even get on stage with any of those, because you don't want to like get on stage and then like bomb in front of Patrice O'Neill. That would like, why would you do that?
Right.
Um
So let's I want to
really
circle around a little bit. So
yeah, okay.
So you went to school. Where did you go to school first in New York? Where did you go to school?
I went to school at NYU.
Okay, for finance.
And I applied. Yeah, and I ended up doing finance. I wholly intended to like just sneak my switch over to Tisch and study film and everything, but apparently whoever's paying tuition gets gets to know what's going on. So I couldn't quite do that. But I was constantly around like film and theater kids. Like I was always around, people who were acting and writing, and I so envied them. And so like when I actually started doing stand-up when I was in college, because I would just, I think my freshman year, actually, me and my friends were walking around. We saw the Comedy Cellar, and my friends were like, "You should do that. Like, do the thing you want to do." And so I was like, "All right." So I like wrote up 5 minutes, and I did the bringer show. And I brought all my friends, and did my first 5 minutes at the Cellar of all places.
Wow.
Um, I mean, it was a bringer show, so it's not like,
But still.
but that, yeah, no, it was still amazing. It was still like you had like because it's New York, it's like you have to take this seriously. You know what I mean? Like it's not like you getting your friends together to do a bringer show in like, Indiana or like Kansas or something, or, Ohio. And not that you don't take yourself seriously there, but I think that when you want to do something like as a profession, as a career, New York and LA, there's just they're they're so much more intense
Right. Okay.
in
So let
New
me let
York.
me let me stop you there, just for the folks out there. Explain what the bringer show is, what that means, what the terminology means.
All the fun terminology of
Yeah.
stand up,
Exactly.
bombing and killing. Yeah.
Yeah.
So a bringer show is where you have to, like, the person performing has to bring, it's usually a lot of people, like 10 people to a show just to be able to perform for like 5 minutes,
Like you,
which means that those 10 people have to pay a cover charge and have to pay for drinks and what have you.
the
So
guarantee
basically
it's
it's
the
just
it's
like
the
their way.
guarantee that if you suck, at least they're going to make money on some drinks and seats. That's what the idea is.
Yeah. If is generous. I think when you suck, when you suck,
Right.
they always get their money. But it's a lot of paying your dues. Like I barked for like 4 years or something. Like, barking is passing out flyers, for shows. So you either bring people or you bark. Um, and everybody starts out this way. Almost everybody starts out like this. So I was doing, I was barking in New York, and just to like pass out flyers on the street, and for almost everybody, especially New Yorkers, to be like, fuck off. I'm just trying to go get, just trying to go to a bar. I'm not trying to see your dumb comedy show.
I'm sure I was one
Um,
of the people who just passed up on that card.
yeah.
Like, well,
Or like some people did, they just like took the flyer and then they threw it away in my face. Like, thanks, dude.
but hey, you know what? That's the good thing about New York, is you know right away where you stand. Like you get immediate result.
Yeah.
He threw it right in the garbage, so you knew there was no guessing about it. It was just,
Yeah. That guy's not coming.
yeah.
That guy's not coming to my show.
Right. So let me circle
Um,
around a little bit, because stand-up comedy is, I mean, it's the Braveheart of entertainment. I mean, that is the most courageous, most amazing thing I think that most performers can do, and it takes just a very special kind of person who special, I put in quotes, who wants to do that and can do it.
yeah, no, I know.
So let's go back a little bit. When you were a kid and you were thinking of what you want to be, did you always want to be in entertainment? Did you think you were funny, or did you want to be an actress? What was the thing? We'll get to where you went, but what started you off as a kid?
When I was a kid, I did love writing, and I loved. I always wanted to be a writer director. Like that is one thing I always wanted to do, and um, and I think somewhere in there I also wanted to perform, and I didn't have enough confidence to like put myself out there as a performer first. So I started writing a little bit more. And as far as comedy, I mean, comedy was very much my defense mechanism, as it is for like everyone who gets into it. But I think because I felt like I didn't really fit into school, because I grew up outside of Pittsburgh, and it's getting like racially, it wasn't like best environment. I always got made fun of for being Indian, like just like dumb like Simpsons jokes and curry things and 7-Eleven jokes and all that shit. Um, and then at home, I was very much the odd one out too, because I was like more sensitive than everyone else, and I just didn't quite fit in everywhere I went.
Right.
So like the only way that I really got to get people kind of on my side was through humor. And like, if I was funny, then people would either pay attention to me, which is what I wanted, or at least not make fun of me. You know,
Well,
I'd get one of those two
here's a
things.
question for you as well. I mean, the other aspect is being a funny female. How was that I mean, how did that play into this as a kid as well?
Well, I mean, you're not really supposed, even like as an American, like you're not really supposed to be super funny, as females. There's still like these um preconceived notions of what women are supposed to be like, and funny isn't usually one of them. I think you're supposed to be like have a sense of humor,
Right.
but especially like as an Indian person, um you're supposed to be a little bit more feminine and not like super outspoken and brash, and I would curse and all of that, like I would always get in trouble. And I mean, I would just go for the inappropriate joke every time because I wanted to get a reaction. I thought it would like relax my mom and dad. And instead, it just made them like ground me or, whatever. Um, but I did always like, I thought I was funny because I could make people laugh because I got the reactions, and like it was like my whole childhood was just like a it was like being on stage. It was just like with the hardest freaking audience because this audience did not want to laugh at you.
Right.
It was
Right.
like a real true Staten Island audience right there. They're like
It's like show 'em.
oh, bitch, make me laugh,
Right. Right. So as a kid growing up, especially with sort of the cultural part of your family and sort of how that orients towards a certain kind of success, you know, defense mechanism being comedy, when does is it always sort of like this encoded, like coded, cloaked thing that you kept, or at some point do you come out and perform? At some point do you kind of say, this is what I'm going to do? Or how do you balance it? I mean, once you got into school, you were studying finance, and then you were doing finance in the day and going to comedy. You found a way to split that life. But as you're growing up, how'd you find the outlet for those things?
I wrote a lot. I did write a lot.
Mm.
Like I would write plays, I would write poems, I would write like, uh, you know, um, I would write short stories. I would, I mean, Jim Carrey. I love Jim Carrey and Chris Farley. They were my heroes growing up. Like I loved them. Monty Python also. Just all of that were like really absurdist but really smart comedy. I think watching a lot of that also helped too because it was even watching it was kind of a catharsis and an education in and of itself of like, oh, this is what makes people laugh, and you're kind of scientifically getting into it that way.
Right.
So it was it was always like a test of like how to make the bullies laugh at school and the parents laugh at home, and it was always like you can't like you those jokes don't overlap, let me tell you.
No, no,
You can't make the same
no.
joke to your
Yeah,
parents.
the fucking dick jokes or whatever don't play real well at the wedding. It's not going to work.
No,
All
exactly.
all right. So uh, through as you're growing up, do you think are you where's the dream? Does it always stay there? Do you think you're eventually going to get to do the thing you want to do, or are you feeling like, hey, looks like I'm going to finance, looks like I'm going to business? You know, where does the dream finally come out for you? Or do you ever give up on it? Or did you ever
Oh,
discourage yourself?
yeah. Well, I it's funny, at the same time that I wanted to be a writer or director, I also wanted to be a lawyer, but I think I only wanted to be a lawyer because I saw lawyers on TV and in movies, and they were like it was so cool to, like, be able to, be all badass in the courtroom, and I think at some point I realized, when I was in high school and college that I didn't really wanna be a lawyer, I wanted to be a TV lawyer. Like, I wanted to be someone who could script my own stuff and say what I wanted to say. Like I wanted to be on a David E. Kelly show, Um, but there were definitely moments, but not until much later when I was really in to doing like stand up, and even in my career, that I was like, wait, what is there a different way out? Like, should I have done a different thing? You know, because I mean, I never liked finance. So I never, from day one when I started working in finance, I was saving to quit because I was like, this is just a job, this is just a paycheck, and I'm going to, you know, do my own thing eventually. When I've like saved enough money. And I actually did do that. I actually like quit my job and then I moved to LA and with like a suitcase and then couch surfed for a while.
What did
Um,
what did the family think
but
you were gonna do?
oh, I mean, they were not my mom and dad were not happy. Also because I was like, I announced it like a week before I left. So I was like, and I think I kind of made a kind of impulsive choice. But I had applied to the Fox Writers Workshop and I didn't know if I was going to get in or not. But I just left anyway because I was like, there's nothing for me in New York right now. Like I don't have a job here. I was still doing stand up a little bit, but I really loved the idea of like creating worlds and characters and building on them. And that's a whole different animal than doing stand up. It's just a whole different outlet for creativity.
Right.
Um, and when I told my parents, I think they were kind of in denial about it for a long time. And then my dad would call me when I moved to LA. He would call me like every 2 weeks. He would be like, "So you're moving back in 6 months, right? You're moving back in 6 months." And then like 6 months later, I'm like, "Dad, I'm not moving back. Like I don't know. There's nothing. I'm not working at the family business. I'm not going back to finance. You know, there's just
Right.
this is it. You know, this is
Wow.
there's nothing else here." Yeah.
Before we get you to LA, let's circle back to that moment when you're walking past the Comedy Cellar and it's time to think about really doing this. Again, for someone like me who's just an actor and I come from the theater and film world and stuff, but stand-up comedy is just, to me, is just the bravest thing in the world. What was it? Did you have to think about it? Was it just, let me just dive in? Did you have 5 minutes? Did you have a minute? How much material did you have? What were you doing? What was the kind, like, what was that first moment walking on that stage with that material?
Oh, I mean, it was material that so I had gone to like me and my friends were just looking for a bar that would not card us probably. And there was some guy um who was like, "Hey, come to the show tonight." And we were like, "Oh, we don't want to come to the show, but how does she get on the show? Like, how can she get a spot on one of the shows?" Because I was like, I want to do this. So I asked this guy, and I was like, how can I, you know, how can I get some stage time? And then he told me I would have to do a bringer, and then like I think maybe a month or two later, I was at the club, but in between that, in that 1 to 2 months, I was writing material and then I would test it out on my friends and like my roommates. And there was one thing that my dorm had. They had like a talent show night. And I did my routine there. And I got enough like good feedback, like I got enough good like laughs and stuff that I was like, okay, I think I'm ready with this thing. Like it was like I had it memorized verbatim, and it was like 5 minutes, you know, like I didn't want to, you know, do any less than that. So yeah, it was I think it was pretty dark too. I think it was like really it felt like really dark. I remember seeing a few horrified looks in the room, but for the most part, everyone was having fun.
Was it was you know like it was dark? Was it blue material? Was it where you could just like say anything you wanted kind of thing? What was your stuff? Were you doing bits? Were you doing stories? Were you doing straight jokes? Were you Rodney doing punchlines? Like what's your style? Would you?
Oh, yeah. It wasn't storytelling actually, not at that point. I That's an elevation to get to when you can actually tell a story on stage and you know make it funny at every beat. But mine was just like probably jokes that were non sequiturs. You know, something I feel like I had something about like I want like the Rolling Stones or something like that. Just like random, like it would be like the Rolling Stones, and then something about the subway, and then something about you know what. It was just like the most random, you know, conglomeration of jokes that I could just that I could just like piece together into 5 minutes.
Just a stream of consciousness that you put together into a routine, into a bit, into a bunch of bits. So
Yeah, but I I did hone it, yeah.
you did this for how long? How long were you doing stand up? And it's the Comedy Cellar in New York. Was Dangerfield still around? Like, what were the places you were hitting in that stretch?
Well, when I didn't really start doing it like full time, which is like full time at night, and really like started doing like at first I was doing all the open mics,
Mm.
and so people would have an open mic at like the back of any bar. It was just a way to make money because you had to pay $5 to get 5 minutes of stage time. So for a few years after college, I was just doing open mics, and they were mostly in the Village because there's just so many bars in the Village, and you can only get so many New Yorkers into yours, I guess. But it would also be a lot like a Tuesday night at like 7 at night, so it's not like you're going to get a whole bunch of people there. But like the Village and Lantern was one of them. Boston Comedy Club, I think, had open mics. Most of them were just like random bars. But then when I started getting actual stage time, I was often at when I graduated. I was often at the Boston Comedy Club a lot. I was at a place called Haas. I was at the comic strip, the Laugh Factory. Just kind of like wherever I could get a spot,
So
just making my way
so
around.
what's the war story that where you either you're following somebody? Like, what's the story, the comedy war story where you're like, oh, I'm going on after this? Somebody just killed it. Somebody just killed that room, and you're like, all right.
Yeah. Well, let's see. I mean, this one time, um, I so when Chappelle show was on, Chappelle would come down to Boston Comedy Club because that was like the club that he got, that he was always at when he started in New York. And so when he would come down, like we would usually be able to we were lucky if we got like 20 people in that club. When we said Chappelle was going to be down, it was a packed night every time. It would be like a Tuesday at like 11 at night, and we'd still get a packed crowd. And then if you were supposed to go on, well, too bad. You're going on after Chappelle and Neil Brennan and everyone go, right? So like if we had a crowd then still left after Chappelle left and his whole, team, there'd be like 20 people left. And how the fuck do you follow Chappelle? Like, I don't know any comic. I don't know any comic that would want to follow. Like, who would do that to themselves?
Right.
I'm not a masochist. I mean, I am because obviously I, go up on stage. But like, why would you do that to yourself? So I think those were the hardest. I think that the ones that were really hard were the ones when I knew that there were big comics in the back just watching, just waiting for their time.
Right.
And I was like, you're not doing stand-up to just an audience. You're doing it to freaking like Judah Friedlander and, Bill Burr and Jim Norton are back there waiting for their, 10 minutes. So you better fucking bring it. And I think sometimes I just stick myself out.
What's interesting is I had Jackie Martling on this podcast a while, and he was talking about comedians, and one of the things they love the most is, they wait for the other comedian to bomb because that's what they find the funniest. So they'd be sitting in the back, so you'd hear the silence, you'd hear the comedian do their bit, then total silence, then 3 seconds later, off in the distance, you'd hear all the comics in the back laugh because they were waiting to see, who's gonna tank, whose plane's gonna crash, Yeah, it's an amazing art form, and I'm curious, do you carry when we're gonna now get you out to LA and your screenwriting career and stuff, but first of all, do you miss it? Do you get to do any of that ever again? Have you ever gone back to stand up at all? Do you get up and perform at all?
You know what? When I moved to LA, I felt like I had to start all over again. And I was like, I mean, it seemed like there was either you really get into writing and become a much better writer, or you do stand up. And I picked writing because I mean that's kind of what I came out to LA for. If I wanted to keep doing stand up, I should have stayed in New York because that's where you really cut your teeth,
Right.
you know. So I did a little bit, like I did a few spots in LA, but at the time that I moved to LA, there weren't many clubs. Like if you could get 4 spots a week, you were lucky. And I was like, how do you work out material
Right.
in 4 spots? And like, I'm not going to constantly be doing open mics to work out material. That's a horrible, venue to work out new material.
And that's the thing about
So
that art form, right? Is you have
out.
to. That's the thing about that art form is you have to have an audience. You have to constantly work it. Otherwise, you can't do it in your room. You need those people.
Yeah, and preferably not other stand-up comics that are just like working on their own stuff while you're doing your 5 minutes.
Right.
You know what I mean?
So,
Um,
so you go out to LA to be a screenwriter, to write for the screen, to write for movies, to write for television. What is your plan, and what is your? You said you got into a Fox a workshop type thing. What was the blueprint when did you just go out? I don't know what I'm going to do, or did you have an idea of where you were headed?
well, I when I moved to LA, I literally had nothing. I had no idea what I was going to do. I was just going to try to get like an assistant job, or I was going to, get some kind of like education writing at USC or UCLA or something like that. I wasn't. I honestly didn't have a plan at all.
Mm,
Um, and I wasn't really sure about what I had done until I got into I got into two writing workshops. One was the NAMIC writing workshop, and I felt like it was like a 2-day workshop. It was much smaller than one than the network ones, but it was like, okay, you're on the right track. Like you can write, you just need to get much better at it. And I was connected with a few executives through friends who were nice enough to read the pile of garbage that I had written and called a script and give me notes on it. And even they were like, you're good. You just need to like learn structure and you need to learn blah, blah, blah. And those were the things that I could learn. So I was like, okay, I can do this. And then when I got into the Fox Writers Workshop, like within a year of moving to LA, I was like, okay, now this is really a sign. Like they really did, I got a lot of compliments on my jokes in the script. And actually, when I walked in the room, for the Fox Writers Workshop, and they were interviewing me before I was girl, because the way that you write jokes, you write such hard jokes, we thought you were a guy. And I was like, I know that's a compliment, but also fuck you because women can write jokes. You know what I mean?
right. So they
Um,
so they thought they thought just based on the material, they thought they were dealing with a man, and you come in and yeah.
yeah, yes. Which I was like, I thank you for that compliment. It's also backhanded.
Yes.
Um, but yeah, so when I got into the Fox Writers Workshop, I was like, okay, so this is real. This is real encouragement. Like mom and dad were wrong, and like everyone, who told me to go back home was wrong, because there's something here.
Right.
Like I can write. I just probably need to get better.
So it's
Um,
so like a lot of artists that I've gotten to talk to so far, that positive that initial positive reinforcement, that first bit of encouragement that says, okay, I'm not nuts. I can do this job. It was there that you found that.
that workshop was good. It's much better now, I think. But it was a good process of being like, this is where you need to get better at storytelling, and this is what you're good at. And consistently, like people always like the characters in the world that I was building. But I always needed to get better at like the structure, because as a comedy writer, you get attached to jokes and you're just like, but the script revolves around this one joke that you can't cut because it's so funny, and obviously that's the first thing that you cut because it has no purpose there. Um, but so it was like, it was like a victory, kind of. It was like vindication,
Right.
of okay, maybe I can actually do this thing. But I gotta tell you, I mean, throughout the whole thing, I there was never a point where I didn't think I shouldn't be. Where I thought I shouldn't be doing this.
Right.
You know what I mean? Like there was never a point where I was like, no, this might not be for me. Whenever I doubted myself, it was always like, I want money, I don't like being broke, there's safety and security in going to finance or getting my MBA, or it was always doubting like my lifestyle, but not what I was doing.
Well,
So
that's really impressive because, again, it's something that's in you. It takes a lot of courage to get into this line of business that we do, and for you to just never have that feeling of am I right or am I wrong? That you're on the right track. So, just for from a craft standpoint, when you're writing, in the beginning, were you writing for television? Was it movie writing? Like what was the screenwriting you were doing? What kind of stuff were you working on? When you talk about structure,
I
structure.
was always good point. Yeah, I was always writing for television at first.
Okay.
Um, I had written like this insane screenplay on like 4 hours of sleep over a week in college. Um, um, and again, I just got compliments on like the jokes and the characters in the world. But for television, there's a certain structure, and back then, uh, like Apple TV wasn't a thing and Hulu wasn't a thing. So like, you know, Atlanta wasn't a thing and Louie wasn't a thing, and all those TV shows that play with amorphous structure. And it was just like you can't just tell like this linear kind of story that, I mean, it would have twists and turns, but like why is there a twist on like the second page and then another one on like page 15? Like this is a completely bananas, It's just like you need I just needed to like kind of like make it more cohesive as a story and
Were
not
they
just like
were they teaching
fun.
you? Were you learning sort of the save the cat, beat sheet kind of structure? Like, what was the thrust of how they were telling you how to do things?
No, that's a good point. So in the Fox workshop, there's this thing called Writers Boot Camp. At least there was a thing back then. I think it was based in Santa Monica, and they had their own guidelines of like how story structure would go, and they had their own like set of turning to. Um, and that kind of helped, but I didn't really have like a formal education in writing. I took a couple classes at UCLA, but I read a lot of books and I wrote a lot of scripts too, and I wrote a lot of spec scripts. And I think that like really studying structure, that like from television, like not just like theoretical, really helped me and kind of honed it in. You know, you need a thing here, you need what's the midpoint, all of that stuff.
Right.
It's still not easy. I'm not saying like I can robotically just be like, and the midpoint is, but it's still like I can tell a lot better now, when there's something missing and act two is too long and blah blah blah, all that stuff.
So do you give yourself sort of a template, or or is it just sort of intuitive now, where by page 23 this is or do you lay out sort of a blueprint where you can hit these buoys? I got to write up to this point where I can. How do you lay out the page and lay out the story when you start writing?
Oh, that's a good question. Well, I mean, I almost always outline. There are rare times when I don't outline anymore. And it always comes to bite me in the ass because then I have to like go back and outline. Um, but I generally actually draw up an outline and then I'll send that to some friends and be like, okay, what do you think of this? And, I always get feedback. And I learned early on that the one thing that's worth its weight in gold in this town, in whatever you're trying to do creatively, is getting feedback, is getting good feedback, not just any feedback. Um, feedback that is informative and insightful and can really like propel you to make your material, whatever you're working on, better. And so when I was starting out, I didn't really know that many people, but when I got into these workshops, there were like another cadre of, friends who were also good, good-ish writers who were up and coming people. So we would start exchanging scripts. And I think that also helped me, like reading other people's scripts also helped me with structure too, because then I was like, oh, I'm making that same mistake. I'm making that same mistake that she's doing,
Right. And I would think
and
that your stand-up comedy background helps you check your ego at the door, when you have to get that feedback, and so you can kind of let go of the stuff and just make it better, right?
you would think, well, um,
Maybe not.
it's still hard. Like, okay, so like when you bomb on stage, you want to just get hit by a truck. You just want to walk out the door and have like a semi just hit you, and then you're done. You're done with life. Um, but it still like sucks to get feedback, because one, your material is personal to you no matter what you're writing, and two, you have to go back, even though you know there's something wrong, even though you know that you're gonna have to do more work on it, you're still like, God damn, I'm gonna have to do more work on this thing. It's like you just finished a whole draft of an outline or a script, and you're like, oh. So, and there's almost always more notes than you think there are gonna be.
Right. Right.
So it's I think once I get over, at least personally, like once I get over that initial defensive writer thing of like, oh, damn it, are you right? And then I'll be like, yeah, okay, you're right. Yeah. And then once I start like working on the script or working on the outline, I'll like be like, oh, this is actually, thank you for the suggestion. It's making it better.
Right. Well, I'll tell you, we're going to move forward in your career. So we're going to really get into people giving you notes, because as you get into your career, that's all it is people who probably shouldn't be giving notes or giving notes and on notes on top of notes. So we'll talk about that. But let's get you, what's that first gig that you get? Do you get like a staff writer gig or something? Like, what's the first paying kind of thing where you're like, okay, I'm in LA and I sold something, or I'm on a staff, or I'm in it, I'm working, I'm here, I'm doing it? What is that thing for you?
Yeah, that was when I got my first staff writer job on a show called Ground Floor, which was a multicam on TBS, and that's when I was like, holy shit, I broke into Hollywood. Like, this happened. I actually did it. I did a thing, and it was huge. It was like momentous when I got that job, because I think even the people in my family who were kind of supporting me were thought that she'll quit at some point and realize, and then when that happened, I think it was like, whoa, she actually did it. Like that actually happened. um so it was a big deal, and i I kind of wish that I'd had more exposure to a room before getting into my first staff job, because especially as somebody coming from the stand-up comedy um environment in New York, where everything is, I mean, like, especially if you're a girl, if you're a woman and you're hanging out with the guys doing stand up, like they're going, they're going to say, like, you have to be able to hold your own. Like, they're going to make a sexual like, you don't do, there's no HR. They're going to be sexually harassing. They're going to be they're going to be assholes, and you have to be an asshole back. You just do.
Kind of the job.
Really is. It 100% is. So I thought in my mind that kind of like a common room would be like a bunch of people who used to do stand up or what have you, and they were just like sitting around a table and being funny. And I was like, oh, that's not like that at all. It's like people who have, families at home, and don't always say like, and we're shocked when I would make blue jokes, because I think partly I'm pretty short, like I'm like 5'1". I'm gonna go with the one.
Yeah,
And and I yeah, and I think that you don't expect like a lot of swearing and whatnot to come out of my mouth when you first meet me, and then when it does happen, like there's a shift. There's like a perceptible shift that I see in women and men differently.
Right.
But my room was mostly men, And I mean, it was fine. It was a very specific environment. And I think the one thing I did not know, and I think that really dominates your life and how you work professionally and personally in LA, is the politics of a room. Like, that should be a course that is taught. That's almost, sometimes to some showrunners, it's more important than your ability to write.
Right.
Which is what, like, oh,
So
why on earth would you be a good writer?
well,
Yeah.
let's talk about that. First of all, before we even talk about that, I'm a little disappointed because I think we're like 20 minutes in or 40 minutes in, and I've gotten maybe one fuck out of you. So you're telling me that you're five,
God,
and all I'm gonna get is just great, just curses at me, and I haven't gotten one shit, fuck, piss. George Carlin would be disappointed because the list hasn't. So you'll have to catch up in the second half of this. But two,
I definitely have to catch up. I was just wondering.
just rattle them off at some point. But two, was it? Do you think it was just that specific show that was the vibe of that room? Have rooms changed over the course, or like what do you think that was about?
Oh no, it was most certainly not that specific room.
Okay.
Every single room has its own politics, has its own culture, and it's largely set by the showrunner. I mean, the showrunner is the CEO of that mini corporation, and they set the tone for how that company is run.
Mm.
You know what I mean? So, there's been a lot of articles and a lot of people talking about, like, dysfunctional showrunners and how they're not good managers and this and that. And a lot of it is true. And I mean, a lot of it is just like ego. It's just, it's a free for all. And again, there's no HR. I mean, okay, yeah, there's an HR, but who's going to go to freaking like Warner Brothers or CBS or ABC HR and being like, my showrunner? It's like, oh, you don't want a job? You never want to work in this industry? Okay, go to HR. But also it's like, oh, then that just means that you can't hang, especially in a comedy room. It's like, you don't want to be that girl who, if you remember the Friends lawsuit, I remember that from when I was like a kid, and she was the writer's assistant who sued Friends, who sued like the whole show somehow or something like that, because they were making really crude and lewd comments in the writer's room. And she sued them for some kind of harassment, and it was such a huge thing, and nobody wanted to be that girl, especially as a girl. Like, you didn't want to be that person. So there's so much more pressure on you to be able to throw it back, like throw it,
Well,
like if
let me stop you
someone
there.
makes,
Let
like,
me stop you there because this is an interesting tangent we can go off on. I want to get back to the craft of what you actually do in the room, the actual nuts and bolts of how you guys are tossing ideas around, because I think that's kind of the thrust of the show. But what you said there is interesting, that there's this this tough armor you have to have, and you have to be able to throw it back. Do you think the environment the way it is now has changed that in any way? Sort of the Me Too basic, that whole have things shifted? Do you still feel like you got to duke it out in there, or like is that an anachronistic way to look at it? How is it now?
I think that, well, now it's much more different. I mean, in the sense that, like, you're not, I'm not going to say you're not going to get harassed or anything, but it's that eyes are on you, and so you're going to do, you're not going to just let yourself be the worst version of yourself in the room or whatever you want. Like, you're not going to let yourself be whatever,
Huh.
because I think that the Me Too movement has shed a light on um the awareness that you are still in a professional environment.
Right.
And I also think that the increased diversities in rooms have put people on a less comfortable, in a less comfortable seat, but in a good way.
Okay.
In the sense that, like, if you're just hanging with your friends and all your friends happen to look like you're just kind of shooting the shit
Right.
in the room, and you don't really care about people's feelings, because if you can't fucking, like if we're gonna break your balls, well, what are you gonna go fucking cry in the bathroom? You know what I mean?
Right.
I think I had like 5 fucks in
I
there,
I
so
was
you're
counting.
welcome.
Thank you.
Um, but now I think that if you're in a group of people that don't look like you, um, you're a lot more aware of how you think and how you articulate your ideas and how that affects the other people in your room. Because to be honest, look, the reason that there are more diverse people in a room, and I hate to use that word, but it just is what it is because there are more people of color in America,
Right.
and the art industry is a business. It is a money machine, and those people have disposable income, and they want brown, black, Asians, like they want all of those people to watch television, watch the ads, and go buy stuff.
Right.
You know what I mean? And that's part of the reason. That's a big part of the reason why there's more diversity in rooms. So you kind of have to be aware of the environment that you're in and the message that you're sending out, because you don't want to offend a bunch of Asian audience people or Latinx audience people because you didn't have a Latinx person or an Asian person in your room and you made that joke and now it's all over Twitter. You know what I mean?
Well, also,
So
also, I would
you
say,
I think
I said,
yeah.
also, I would say that because I've heard this too, is that's the sort of the negative side of it, where you don't want to do something that alienates an audience, but also like you want that you want the female, the male, because if it's all one thing, they're not getting like the guys don't get the girls' jokes, so you need the other girls in there so that it's like you're not getting why that joke is funny, but there's 50% of the people out there are women. They're going to laugh at this. Trust us, we know. So I think it's the same with culture and everything else. You want somebody to go, that's funny. Here's why it's funny.
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, honestly, like I believe personally on a fundamental level, and this is part of the reason I love writing is that when you have different points of view, they only make and elevate, like they only make your material better. They only elevate it because you aren't just looking at something in a one-dimensional way. You have better jokes because of it. You have you have contradictory points of view that add more authenticity and layers
Right.
to your show or your movie or what have you.
Right. All right.
So
So let's get into the routine of it. What is that writer's room like? What's the day like? How do you guys, let's just take a comedy room, for example. How do you do it? Like, you're sitting around, everybody's tossing ideas. Do you have an idea of what the show has to be for that week, and the story, and let's write it? Or how do you do it?
okay, so in a comedy writer's room, it varies from room to room, but for the most part, you're all in the same room and you're trying to come up with a good story and for an episode, right? And then once you kind of land on an idea, you build off of that. For example, in the Blackish room, when we were trying to come up with ideas, I remember we would start out with just like stories, like personal stories. um I remember one of the execs was like, one of the EPs, I mean, was like, oh, you know what, I dishes away in our dishwasher last night, and I was so proud of myself because it was so awesome, and my wife was so pissed at me because she's like, I do this every day, and I don't get any credit. And we built a whole story on that was, because a lot of the other writers were like, oh yeah, that happens to me a lot. My husband thinks he's like amazing when he does dishes once. um so then you kind of start building a story off of that, and then you're like, okay, well, we have an idea, we have a bigger idea, but then how does it relate to the show and what the show is about and what we're trying to say through the show, and how does it relate to what this family is going through within the context of a Black family that is moving up socioeconomically but feels like they're also being disconnected from the roots.
Right.
um so then we kind of build around that. And a lot of that was taken from, in this case, it was from the creator's um, own life story. So, he might have an opinion on that. And then we would kind of go around the room. And if you had an opinion on like to how to make the story like a little bit more fleshed out, you do that. And then we would start putting the beats on the board. And depending on if we're writing a couple of episodes, and we just saw on ground floor too, that I think every comedy writer room does this, you break up into rooms because you're working on a lot of scripts. And so you have like this room that's going to go off and do that, and then this room that's going to stay and work on like the draft of the last episode or what have you. But generally, then once that story is beaten out, then you start making, you know, a much the writer of the episode will go and turn that into an outline. And before they go and turn into an outline, we generally um have like a few hours or maybe a whole day where like all the writers are in one room, and we're just kind of like joking about every beat so that the writer has enough jokes and like funny material to put in the outline. And then you go off with the outline. The outline is generally approved or not approved by the showrunner. And then obviously the process of like the producers, the studio,
Right.
the
Yeah.
network,
All the
all
notes start
do
coming
that.
in, from
Yeah,
on high.
exactly.
So let me go back a little bit because this is interesting to me. Because my whole thing is, especially directing and stuff. I'm always concerned with the story. What is it about? What are you trying to say? And then the plot. I mean, that's great. I don't like to get all caught up too much in plot. Um, I always want to make sure that we're not steering off the story. So if I understand you correctly, you got what the show is about. You know what you guys are writing about, and it comes from the creator of the show and the idea of what the story is about this. And then you take out of your orbit in your life plot points that kind of come in, and you build kind of plots for each show around this and joke on it. Um, and then you beat it out. Now, so for folks who don't know what that is, explain what beating it out is. What is laying out the beats before you get to the outline? What does that mean? Because for some people, beating it out might mean something else. So I need you to explain this to us.
Well, first unzip your pants, and then no, I'm kidding. Um, so beating out a story is like making into a beat sheet is just the basically the plot points, the turning points of that story.
Right.
And it's not quite an outline, because an outline is much more fleshed out. It has a lot more detail of the story, and it usually goes scene by scene. The beat sheet is just something for the story area. Now, a story area is also something that most shows have to turn into the producers in the studio and the network, and they all have to get that approved too. And the story area is usually just like, it depends, but it's usually like a 3 to 5 page document in prose, not bullet pointed, but in prose of like how the story goes.
Right.
And then again, and that is taken from the beaded out plot points on the board. And then you take the story area, and then after that goes through all the round of notes, you turn that into the outline.
So this is a tremendous amount of structural work, creative work, from understanding what the story is you're telling, to beating out the plot points, to creating an outline, to creating a structure. At every single level of those, it has to be approved all the way up to the studio and the network and whoever else is doing it. Explain, folks, in that process, how long you have to get that done. How long before do you get to work on each one of these?
That's a good question, because it depends between broadcast and cable. I think that broadcast has more tighter deadlines than cable, mostly because you're writing more scripts on broadcast. But generally, you get about I want to say like 5-ish days, maybe including a weekend to do the outline. And then usually get about a week, if not for drama, sometimes you might get 2, but you get about a week to write the script.
Wow.
But again, like in between all of that, like I think I had to do a story area in a few days. And when you're doing the story area and usually the outline, you're still going to work. Usually when you're off on script, you can do that from home or in your office, but like you're not in the room at all.
At the end of the process, then you have to hand it off to actors who you hope are going to land the material. And on network and on a lot of these shows, a different director every time, so there's no continuity in that. As a writer, how does that affect how you're thinking about what you're doing?
Well, it's funny because I guess after like the first few episodes, at least, you get to see how the actors land their lines and especially their jokes. So you start writing to that. Like you're like, oh, I don't know if they're going to be able to do a hard joke, but they can do this kind of joke, or
Aha.
they can do like the awkward, quirky kind of thing. So you might just like give that really good hard joke to somebody else who can actually land a like a hard joke. But it usually depends on whether, like, if it's like a really unique specific kind of joke, it depends on whether you think the actor can pull it off. And if you have a great team and then they can pretty much do anything.
Right.
So
But that's interesting. So as you're getting into the process of it, you're tailoring to the team you have, the actor, the production, the whole, you're starting to see what works, what doesn't. And that's it. That's a fascinating process. How long? So that last one we were talking about was Blackish, which is, how long were you on that show? What network was that? I forget.
that was on ABC. I was on that for the first season because I was on that through the ABC Writers Program.
Hmm.
So after Ground Floor, I had gotten into the ABC Writers Program, and through that, I got onto Blackish, and I was I was there that whole first season, which was very enlightening and very. It was a lot of fun. It was very challenging in some ways, and mostly the political ways more than anything. Um, but yeah, but I mean, we had an incredible writers' room. I mean, I think the cumulative experience that our writer staff had was like over 100 years of
Wow.
experience in the field. Like they were most of them were EPs or co-EPs. They'd at least been writing for a decade, at least, if not two. We had a pretty large staff, and I think that I was one of 2 staff writers, and one of them left about halfway through the season. But you know, and then like after me was the co-producer. So we didn't even have like a story editor or an executive story editor, which are, it goes staff writer, story editor, executive story editor, co-producer, producer, supervising producer, co-executive producer, and then executive producer. So that's the hierarchy of it. And most of
The
our
executive
whole
producer,
team was.
the executive producer is the showrunner. Is that usually how it is?
Well, actually, that's interesting that you ask. Sometimes the executive, the showrunner should be, and usually is. Sometimes not. I'll say that the creator is sometimes not the EP. If you have like a lower level writer who has sold the show, the studio and or network may not want to make that person an EP.
Hmm.
For whatever reason. I don't know. I think it's silly because they
Sure.
created the whole freaking show. I mean, that's hard enough to do to get on the air. But yeah, it's the showrunner is generally an EP, and then you just climb the ranks. It honestly, I mean, in the best of rooms, in the ideal of rooms, it's more democratized. The staff writers and the story editors and exec story editors don't have as much experience, and for the most part, I feel like, especially if you're a staff writer, you shouldn't try to contribute as much as an EP will because they have more experience. You know, like if you think about it like a basketball team, you know, and you're a newbie, you're not gonna outshine, I was gonna say Kobe, but you're not gonna outshine LeBron, you know, RP. So you know, they have those titles for a reason, but you know, it's still however long you've been in the industry. It's not necessarily always telling of your talent relative to everyone else in the room.
Interesting. So
So,
I guess,
which is just to say there are EPs out there and co-EPs that are not that great, and there are staff writers that are amazing, and obviously the other way around.
right.
You know, just like in the human world where we don't go into, you know, there are CEOs and SVPs of companies that are not great, and there are employees that are really good. You know, it just varies.
Right. Well, first of all, I'm glad that you delineated for us that there is a showbiz world and a human world. This is very important for people to understand. There are humans, there are civilians, and then there are the people that do this stuff. So, all right. So, my question, one of my next questions is, with all of this intense work, we're going to get into stuff you're maybe doing now as we get close to wrapping up. I want to do that, but I want to talk about: do you feel while you're doing this, and you're dealing with the politics, and you're dealing with just the hierarchies and all the chemical interactions of this stuff, do you feel creative? Are you enjoying the work? Like, do you feel like, yeah, this is fun, I'm enjoying this?
Not always. No. It was, I think I kind of had like an existential crisis. And I think Kate was telling me that I was having one actually
I'm not
because
surprised.
I got into this. Yeah, I know. He was right too. But like I feel like I had gotten to this place where I'd worked so hard towards, and then I'm in this space. Like I'm here. I'm in the dream. I'm on cloud nine, you know, like it's amazing. And because of egos, because of politics, because of things that I had no awareness of before, and didn't really know how to manage then, I was like, oh, I'm not enjoying this. And what, like, it was such a weird thing where you're just like I'm like, this is gonna be the best sandwich I've ever had in my life, and then you eat it and you're like, this tastes like shit, you know? And you're like, why is this happening? And is it me? You know, the first thing I go to is just like, is it me? And then, you know, on a couple of the shows, I know it wasn't just me. And you know, I was kind of in the trenches with other writers, and we were just kind of trying to get through it because it was either really poorly managed or there were just egos in the room that were bigger than the show itself and were very destructive. But I will say there were, I mean, points where I was just like, I think, am I wrong? Like, this is what I wanted, right? Like, this is what I wanted to do. And then I'll go off and write my own thing. And I'm like, yeah, no, this is what I wanted to do because I love this. Like, I love writing and I love this. But then, you know, you go back into like the politics. And I feel like, unfortunately, I've been in rooms where there have been a certain level of management issues where either you know, some of the people at the top or one of the people, you know, people at the top were just not able to handle their own ego, whether it was like an inflated ego or a deflated ego. And coming from like a corporate finance environment, and even from stand-up comedy, oddly enough, I didn't know how to deal with that because stand-up comics will just go out and tell you what they're, you know, they'll just be like, you know, you're like fucking stepping on my toes, bitch. Like, what the you know, like they'll be like, get all like step off. But, you know, in this environment, there's so much that's unsaid, and you only understand what happened like a month later,
Right. So there's this,
you know, and you're like,
the,
oh, that's why he was mad that
right,
one.
there's this sort of passive aggressive I'm not going to tell you, but you're going to feel it one way or the other vibe. So, so the only way you put down that shit sandwich, right, is you get back you get back into your own stuff. So let's talk about that. What what are the kind of things you were writing for yourself, and then obviously I guess you're pitching that and you're selling that. What are the things that helped you put that the shit sandwich down and have yourself a nice meal for yourself?
Um, I no more sandwiches, completely. But I sold a pilot, and was that was kind of good. It had like an Indian point of view to it, and at least like it was a few years ago, and even then, I mean that wasn't that long ago, but even then, like I was being pitched these like really stereotypical things to change in my pilot. And I was like, I can't do this. Like, I'm not putting fucking Bollywood in my pilot. Um, but the stuff that I'm writing now, I think is a little bit more authentic to what I've always wanted to write and the way that I used to perform stand up, which is just like, kind of a no holds barred. Because the shows that I've been on were largely either on broadcast TV, which doesn't really always get into like the rawness that you can get from cable or streaming. And so the projects that I'm working on now that I've sold so far are ones that I can kind of go into the murkiness and the darkness
Right.
of I also sold a drama, so I'm working on both comedy and drama genres. um and the drama is like this really dark family drama that has kind of like Shakespearean edges to it,
Oh, awesome.
all the manipulative deceit, the lies, the
Oh,
all that.
excellent. Well,
Yeah.
yeah. Well, I knew once we put you on here that the darkness would eventually come out.
Yeah.
The dark edges and the swords and the blades would come out. All right, that's very cool. So, first, two things. One, the pilot that you did, was it Bad Indians? Do I have that right?
Oh, that was different. No, that's funny. That was something that I did with a friend, and we wrote these like we were just gonna make like a web series, and we wrote up these episodes, and we were just like, why don't we just shoot it and see what
Right.
happens? And so yes, that's what I was an actor in, and me and we both starred in it, and we had a lot of fun making it.
All right,
And
so two things. I'm gonna jump in here. So one, for that, did your family see that, and what did they think? The people who were worried about you coming back in 6 months when they finally saw some of this kind of stuff with that culture infused into it. What were the reactions?
well, I didn't actually show it to my parents because I'm pretty sure there's at least there's at least one dick joke in there,
Exactly.
at least one, um,
I think there's one in the
I've always
trailer.
I know. Well, I showed it to like my sisters and my cousins just to see what they thought of it. But I think when I sold the other pilot that I sold a few years ago is called Make Libya Great Again. And that was actually originally written as a half hour, a very like cable, streaming kind of dark half hour. And it was bought by the CW as an hour long, so I had to completely rewrite the script as an hour long.
Hmm.
So I'm taking that back out right now as a half hour because it's never gone out there as a half hour. Um, but um, that one comes from like an Indian point of view as well, and I think it's funny when you mentioned my parents in there. It's I think they would appreciate and be proud of a show that I did. And I'm saying this very carefully, as you can tell, that I did that came from the Indian point of view. However, if it was from my very like dark, cursy, swear wordy point of view, I think there's an amendment to that. I think they'd be like, well, if only there wasn't a sex scene in there. But I'm like, well, what are you gonna do? We can't. sexually repressed. Um,
We all have to make compromises.
but
Mom and dad are gonna have to make compromises because we need the sex scene in there. So let's just do it. All right. So,
yeah.
so last couple of questions I want to touch on because I saw somewhere that you teach as well, but we'll get into that in a second. But the one process that I think you can enlighten me on, and a lot of the folks out there, is you're a writer, you're out in Los Angeles, you're out there pitching and selling these shows to networks, to cable, to whatever outlets are picking them up. What's the pitch process like? How do you get the show sold? How, a lot of us don't see behind that curtain. So you just give us a little kind of brief primer on getting your script, going to a pitch, pitching it, and the reaction when you go, oh, I think they're going to buy it, that kind of a thing.
Oh yeah, sure. So generally for me, the pitch process has been that I go and pitch my pitch to production companies, and you get connected with the one that understands your vision for the show and likes it, and there's a mutual compatibility there. And then they if they're super excited and passionate about it, like they have to be super excited and passionate about it, and that is very important because there might be points in which your excitement and passion kind of starts waning because you're like, well, no one's going to buy it, so you need producers who really understand the vision of what you're trying to say. And then you generally the production companies, the producers might have notes on your pitch. So then you amend the pitch and revise it a little bit per notes, and try to make it a little deeper. And then you pitch it to studio, and you go around pitching it to studios until hopefully one of them buys your pitch, or there's a bidding war or something like that. And whoever wins out again will have notes on your pitch, so you'll get even more notes on the pitch.
Let me stop you.
And yeah.
Pitching in person?
Oh,
Is that
well,
part of the deal?
I mean, I have pitched both in person, and I, have also pitched on Zoom because of, everything this year. And I'm not gonna lie, I don't think that we need the human to human pitch because it's a lot easier to not have to memorize your pitch and just be able to read it off the screen, because for one thing, your audience doesn't like get bored when you forget something, and you don't have that weird like, oh shit, I forgot something, like what did I not say this, you know what I mean? I think there's a lot more confidence in it. I think in the room there's nothing but you in the room, and like your executives kids aren't going to run in, or their dog or whatever, so there's at least that. And I do think that like seeing someone in person is obviously very different than seeing them through Zoom. So in-person pitches are probably better, but I'm not going to say that I miss them.
Well, I'll tell you what, clearly I would rather have you sitting right in the room here. That would be a lot
I
nicer and probably better for both of us. So, but we're working our way through this the best we can, and I think it's coming off pretty good so far. So, so the other thing is, do you teach? I think I saw something where you teach writing. What's that about?
Yeah. Well, there's this school, the Writing Pad, contacted me several years ago when I was in the ABC program, and they just wanted me to teach a class on how to get into like the fellowships and stuff. And I guess I did a good job. The students liked me, and they gave me a few more classes, and then that just kind of like kept going. And I found it to be a nice like way to still keep my gears moving, even it not have to be in like a heavily politicized environment. Like if I was, on staff or something like that, and it was like a kind of difficult room, it would be nice to just like work on somebody else's material and help somebody else with that. So
Right.
yeah, I taught a few classes this year, and I'm probably gonna start again
Is
next year.
there a satisfaction, a different kind of satisfaction that you get from seeing a student working on something and coming and getting it that you don't get from creating on your side?
I think they're two very different things. It's just like teaching a man to fish kind of a thing, you know what I mean? And kind of like creating the fish and creating the lakes and and the whole thing. So it's a very different satisfaction of helping other people achieve their dream or achieve what they're trying to say on the page as well. um but I think I mean I love writing like that. That's it. Like teaching is something that I love doing for other people, but I really love writing, creating. That will never stop.
All
So
right, so I think we'll wrap it up here. And I guess my last thing for you is you've survived the existential crisis, and you got out of finance, luckily, successfully, and escaped, battled through New York, got out to Los Angeles, and love of writing is still there. How are you now? How is when you look and look around at your life and where you're at? What's the dream still to come, and how do you feel about where you're at right now? Those two things.
um I yeah, there's definitely a lot more dreams still to come. I want to I want to be running shows. I want my own shows on the air. I want to um shoot a feature soon. I'm working on one that I'm almost done with. Um, I want to get my material out there that's like from me. Because I feel like the Notorious B.I.G. said, I have a story to tell. And coming from New York, I can't. You
Got
can
to
take a girl out of Brooklyn, but you can't. um, but yeah, I think I have a lot of stories to tell, and I have a very specific point of view, and I have something to say that's not out there yet. And I would love to be able to run shows and give people chances and run a functional room, like a really like a good room. um and I think from where I'm at right now, i'm I think sometimes I'm in awe that you know, especially being I'm in my parents' house right now through COVID, but like just being like this little kid that really wanted to do this, and then seeing myself that has actually done it. It's pretty fucking amazing.
pretty fucking amazing.
It's pretty great. It's a yeah.
It is
Yeah.
pretty fucking amazing. It's particularly fucking amazing to watch somebody do it and see them get there and have the courage to step out and not think about what might go wrong or might not, and just do it and just know that it's always the right thing to do. I think you're fantastic. I think you're lovely. I'm glad Kate sent you my way, and I look forward to all the great stuff that we're going to see coming out from you. If anything I can ever do to help you, you just shoot a note my way, and I'll be happy to jump in and help whatever I can do. But I thank you for coming on here today, and I learned a lot about the whole behind pulling the curtain back on the writer's room and what it's like to do what you do. And I have the utmost respect for writers and especially comic writers. So I'm very impressed. Thanks for coming on.
Thank you so much. I'm so glad Kate connected us. This was amazing. I was like, how am I going to top her nude model story? Like, I didn't do that. Do I have to become a nude model now?
Look, you followed Chappelle. You can follow Kate Van Demeter. So
That's true. I'm putting that on my resume.
that's right. Well, thank you so
Thank
much.
you
I
so
really,
much.
really appreciate it. And you'll probably come out in the next couple of weeks. I'll send you an email with the thing and everything. So thanks a lot.
Okay. Thank you so much, Russ. This was a pleasure. It was a pleasure talking to you.